The impacts of oil and gas development in the Arctic National Wildlife would be very devastating for our people, for the Gwich'in people from Alaska, North Yukon and the NWT. It would definitely affect our way of life because the Porcupine Caribou Herd is the main source of food for the Gwich'in people.
We have already lost almost every First Nations culture on Earth, but there are still two left that are largely undisturbed. The Gwich'in and the Inupiat. The Gwich'in are caribou people, living off the Porcupine Caribou Herd that calves every June on the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. The herd migrates from the coastal plain over the Brooks Mountain Range and across the Porcupine River that gives them their name to their winter range where they feed 17 Gwich'in villages, spread across Alaska and Canada. The Inupiat are part of the Inuit culture that live throughout the Arctic Ocean coastal region, living off the bowhead whale, seal, walrus, and fish of the Arctic Ocean, as well as caribou from inland areas. While most of the focus on the need to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge has centered on the amazing wildlife there and the environmental concerns, this is also very much a Native American and human rights issue, as the Gwich'in and Inupiat peoples depend upon the animals that are supported by the Arctic Refuge. But Congress is poised to open up this amazing wildlife refuge to massive industrial oil and gas development that would devastate this wild place forever and permanently destroy the cultures of the Gwich'in and Inupiat peoples.
You know, they're planning to develop for oil and gas right in the core calving grounds of the Porcupine Caribou Herd. You know, that's a very sensitive place to try to plan that kind of activity.
My name is Darius Elias. My Gwich'in name is Divida Chinatat, which means sheep standing on a high rock mountain. I was born and raised in Old Crow. I lived in Crow Flats from since I was born till I was about 12 years old until I had to go to school. I'm a senior park warden for Vuntut National Park of Canada. If there's ever drilling in the calving grounds of the Porcupine Caribou Herd, I am convinced that it's going to be a slow and painful genocide of our culture. We just simply will not exist without the caribou. It's that simple. If there's no caribou, there will be no Gwich'in.
Old Crow is situated on the Porcupine River, far above the Arctic Circle. Like all Gwich'in villages, it is located along the route of the Porcupine Caribou Herd that feeds the village. In one of my extended visits to Old Crow, I talked to Chief Joe Linklater.
Well, obviously the food source is extremely important, but also I think it's the relationship, the thousands of year old relationship that the Gwich'in have had with the caribou. It's part of our culture, it's part of our way of life, it's part of our identity, and if anything happens to the caribou, it happens to us.
The Gwich'in span from Alaska into Canada and regularly trade back and forth across the border, which in that area is just open wilderness, with no customs or checkpoints.
It's actually pretty funny because the borderline is so arbitrary. They never existed before. I don't think we think of it as being different people. It's very, very arbitrary to have a borderline kind of cut through land that's been shared for thousands of years.
Canada has already protected its portion of the calving grounds of the herd, while the United States has signed an agreement to protect the Porcupine Caribou Herd. Many lawmakers are working to violate that agreement and allow development on the core calving grounds. Scientists say this development would devastate the entire Porcupine Caribou Herd that the Gwich'in depend upon.
Canadians have recognized the importance of the Porcupine Caribou Herd, and they've shown that by protecting for all time just east of the boundary of Alaska, the calving grounds on the Canadian side, and the summer range of the Porcupine Caribou Herd. And just recently, in the last few years, there's Nian Lian Jik, which is fishing branch protected area, which protects 6,500 square kilometers of the winter range of the Porcupine Caribou Herd. So that sends a message to everyone else that Canadians think that protected areas are needed for the long-term viability of this herd.
Melissa Matheson Frost is the granddaughter of the only woman chief that Old Crow has had. She said the hearts are connected between
the Gwich'in and the caribou, and they both kept a piece of each other's heart, so we both have a piece of each other's heart, so we always have that connection. And, you know, we live off of the caribou. It's our subsistence life. You know, we depend on that to feed our families and to feed our children. And, you know, mothers, when they're pregnant with their babies, they eat caribou, and it goes into their blood. It's in our blood. It's in our souls. It's in our hearts. And it's so big a part of our culture, you know, for our traditional clothing, our food, just like it used to be in our songs and dance. It's in our stories and just our history. And something like that you can't just take away it without having an effect on the people. You know, with colonization since the 1700s, you know, we've had to go through a lot, and depending on the caribou has been a major part of our survival, and our traditions and our cultures have been a major part of that survival. And without that, I don't know, you know, how far we can go. I know we're a very strong people, but that connection is just so close that it'd be hard to break, you know.
My grandmother once told me that we are caribou people, that our hearts are half caribou, and the hearts of the caribou are half Gwich'in, and we share the same blood. We're very closely related, and that relationship and that belonging with the caribou has been there since time immemorial. I'll tell you a story. When we're in Crow Flat and the caribou are coming in the spring, they're going north to the calving grounds. We let the cows pass and we wait for the bulls to come.
We know where they were going to. They were going to a special place to give birth to their young. We have respect for animals when they're in their time before giving birth to their young. So we allow them that time, we allow them that peace, that quiet that they need. My grandmother didn't have to go to that place. She's never been there. My mother has never been there. I have never been to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge where the caribou give birth to their young. And we don't have to go. I don't have to go and see, because we know what happens there. And we leave that place because it's a sacred place. It's a place where the caribou give birth to their young. It needs to be quiet. It needs to be left untouched. They need to be able to go into their calving grounds and be able to renew life again so that we may live.
And my grandmother would show us how to talk to the animals, and she showed me how to talk to the raven when it's flying close to camp. She'd talk to it and hold her hand out in Gwich'in, and she'd wait for signs for the raven. She's telling it, let us know where the caribou are if they're coming, and we'll share the caribou eye with you. And I watched her, and the raven wouldn't show any signs. Then one morning, it flipped over like that 3 times in a row. And then she looked back at us and she said, get ready, the bulls are going to be here. That afternoon at about 1 o'clock, bulls showed up on the lake. That's the relationship that we have with the natural world. That's what we're trying to protect as Gwich'in people. It's such an intrinsic part of our culture. It's such a belonging that English words can't express how close that relationship is.
They feel a deep obligation to use every bit of the caribou that they can, so that nothing goes to waste. In this way, they can take just a small portion of the herd to support their livelihood, allowing the overall herd to stay healthy.
You know, when you sight a caribou, you know, everybody seems to be happy. You know, they all talk good to each other and everybody's happy. Pretty soon somebody get a caribou, they bring it in. Everybody having a cookout.
When you actually see the caribou and you see the people get excited about it, that's when you realize how important it is.